Since the show made the clever decision to divide the aftermath of King Viserys' death into 2 episodes, one entirely from the perspective of the Green faction and the latter entirely from the perspective of the Black faction, I was expecting this episode to somewhat overlap the time frame of last week's. However, we quickly see that this episode picks up immediately following the events of last week's episode. The episode begins with Rhaenyra arriving on Dragonstone, having flown straight there following her escape from Aegon's dragon pit coronation in King's Landing. She unfortunately has to be the one to fill Rhaenyra in on the news of both her father's death, as well as the usurpation of her throne by the Green faction. 2 pieces of such potently awful news in rapid succession causes Rhaenyra to begin miscarriaging the baby she was carrying. Rather than stay by his wife's side during the immense suffering of her painful miscarriage, Daemon chooses to summon a council and prepare for war without Rhaenyra's authority. Upon first viewing, I thought this was simply an indication that Daemon prioritized violence and vengeance over care for his loved ones. However, I saw a theory on Twitter that made a lot more sense. Daemon had been through such a painful experience before, with his deceased wife Laena, who died in a failed childbirth. Rather than risk experiencing that trauma again, he chooses to distract himself in what he knows best: war. Unbeknownst to him, however, Daemon's behavior is exactly the opposite of what Rhaenyra wants at this time. Despite her immense pain, she musters up the strength to summon her 2 sons, ordering the eldest Jaehaerys to stop Daemon from making any moves that could birth a war. When informed of Rhaenyra's desire, however, Daemon blatantly disregards Jaehaerys' conveyance of his mother's wishes and chooses to put plans in motion regardless. As we will see throughout this episode, Daemon's love for Rhaenyra only translates so far. As Rhaenyra enters the final stages of her brutal miscarriage, we are shown flashes of her dragons screaming in unison with her. This further showcases the incredibly strong mental link riders have with the dragons they bonded with, a concept that has been shown to us in glimpses throughout the entire season. Finally, Rhaenyra passes the baby, and it is revealed to be already dead and somewhat deformed. The birthing of deformed, lifeless babies with some dragon-like features is something that pops up throughout the history of the Targaryen bloodline. Daenerys even gives birth to a stillborn baby of this nature in the first book and show season. This mysterious trend has led to a lot of discourse in the fandom surrounding the origin of the Valyrian ability to bond with dragons, a mystery filled with possibilities of interspecies breeding and genetic manipulation in the ancient past. However, I won't dive deep into detail on said discourse today, as that would probably take a few hours. Although we don't get too close of a look at the features of the baby in this episode, I wonder if she fits that occasional familial pattern. Despite the baby never having lived in the first place, Rhaenyra holds a funeral for her, one that is interrupted by the arrival of Eric. If you recall, he was one of 2 twin members of the Kingsguard. In the last episode, unlike his brother, he decided against serving Aegon, helped rescue Rhaenys from her chambers, and fled King's Landing. During the briskness of his escape, he was seemingly able to steal King Viserys' crown, now delivering it to Rhaenyra and pledging his loyalty and service to her. This inadvertently transitions the funeral into a coronation ceremony for Rhaenyra, everyone in attendance pledging fealty to her aside from Rhaenys, who refuses to bow. At this point in time, Rhaenys clearly still wishes to remain neutral in the brewing conflict between the Greens and the Blacks. Although she holds no love for the Green faction, she still suspects Rhaenyra and Daemon, the heads of the Black faction, of being involved in the death of her son Laenor. However, throughout the episode, she witnesses Rhaenyra's incredibly strong handling of the situation. Rather than jump straight into Dragonfield War, Rhaenyra first tries to do everything possible to avoid violent conflict and the accompanying death of innocents. This leadership slowly wins Rhaenys over to Rhaenyra's side. In the end, Rhaenys is actually the one to convince her husband Corlys to support Rhaenyra, rather than remain neutral in the conflict. By this point, Corlys has miraculously started to heal from his Stepstone War-induced wounds and has traveled to Dragonstone. Interrupting Rhaenyra's strategic planning comes the arrival of a Green faction ship at Dragonstone, one revealed to be occupied by Otto Hightower and a number of Kingsguard members loyal to Aegon. In a clear parallel to Episode 2, Daemon and Otto once again find themselves facing off on the bridge up to Dragonstone Castle. Just as in that episode, Rhaenyra arrives on Dragonback to come between the two. With Rhaenyra now present, Otto shares the terms of the Green faction. If the Black faction were to surrender and pledge allegiance to Aegon, Rhaenyra will remain Lord of Dragonstone, Lucerys will remain heir to Driftmark, all of Rhaenyra's other sons will be given high positions in Aegon's court, and all lords and knights currently loyal to Rhaenyra will be pardoned. With this proposal comes a parcel delivered from Alicent, one that is revealed to be the page Rhaenyra ripped out of her book in Episode 1 when they were still best friends. This seems to be an attempt from Alicent to remind Rhaenyra of the deep friendship they once held, and appeal to her sympathy on that front. This, of course, does not sway Rhaenyra. Still not wanting to incite violence, rather than kill Otto and his accompanying knights, Rhaenyra promises an answer to Otto's terms the next morning, and departs with her men back up to the castle. Enraged by Rhaenyra's lack of desire for violence toward the Green faction, more of Daemon's true colors are revealed. We see him physically abuse Rhaenyra, the supposed love of his life. Whether this has happened before, or it is the first time now, it doesn't matter. If at this point in the show you still consider yourself a Daemon stan, you are severely misguided. I really believe his presence in the Black faction is meant to add a complexity to the narrative conflict, showing that no one side is purely good or evil. Members of both factions are capable of atrocities, and after the ending of this episode, I am sure they will escalate in volume and intensity from both sides. I want to quickly note that it is also revealed in this scene that, despite being Viserys' heir for quite some time before Rhaenyra was given that title, Daemon was never informed of the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. Despite Daemon's pressure, Rhaenyra still stands stalwart in her desire to avoid violence and the death of innocents for as long as possible. If war between the Green and Black factions will come, she will not be the one to start it. In turn, rather than remain stagnant for the time being, she begins working with her council to solidify which allies they do have. The Black faction won't be getting any help from the houses in the Westerlands, since the head house of that region, House Lannister, is firmly loyal to the Green faction. This gives the Greens the maritime power of the Lannister fleet. However, the Black faction is able to secure a powerful fleet of their own. Following the aforementioned persuasion from Rhaenys, Corlys pledges House Velaryon to Rhaenyra, securing the Velaryon fleet for the Black faction. Additionally, while Corlys had been away fighting in the Second War for the Stepstones, he actually won said war. His securing and fortifying of the Stepstones ensures that they will now be pledged to Rhaenyra too. Since the Stepstones are a key barrier for trade between King's Landing and many of the most powerful free cities of the eastern continent of Essos, Black faction control of the territory equals limited trade in goods coming to the Green faction. In order to ensure this informal blockade is successful, Rhaenys offers to guard the waters between King's Landing and the Stepstones on the back of her dragon. Still, House Velaryon and the support of some minor houses is not enough to stand against the Green faction and their Lannister allies. The Black faction will need to win over houses Tully, Arryn, Stark, and Baratheon. If you recall from Game of Thrones, House Tully is the head house of the Riverlands, the region between King's Landing and the Lannister-controlled Westerlands. Before marrying into House Stark, Catelyn Stark was actually a Tully. Additionally, we see her brother Edmure Tully quite a lot throughout Game of Thrones. Due to its central position between the Crown Lands and the Westerlands, securing this territory will be essential to preventing seamless cooperation between the Green faction and the Lannisters. House Arryn is the head house of the Vale region. In Game of Thrones, this house is led by Lysa Arryn and falls under the control of Littlefinger after he kills her. This house is actually where Rhaenyra's mom, Aemma Arryn, is from, so its support for the Black faction is likely. If you're watching this video, I don't think I really need to explain House Stark to you. All I'll say is that with the support of House Stark comes the support of all other houses in the north. Finally, House Baratheon controls the Stormlands, the region directly south of King's Landing's Crown Lands. If you recall, House Baratheon was the house of Robert Baratheon, the king at the outset of Game of Thrones, as well as his brothers Stannis and Renly. Houses Stark, Arryn, and Baratheon have not yet been contacted by the Black faction. Rather than simply send them letters, however, Jacaerys comes up with the idea to fly directly to the castles on Dragonback. Not only does an in-person presence do more for persuasion than a letter, dragons do wonders. Supporting this plan, Rhaenyra orders Jacaerys fly north to the Vale of Arryn and then to Winterfell. She then orders Lucerys fly south to Storm's End. Little did she know this would be the last trip Lucerys ever makes. Before I dive into Lucerys' Storm's End mission, I want to discuss a Dragonstone-based scene that I found no good placement for. We see Daemon deep within the cave system of the island, singing some sort of High Valyrian song as he locates and approaches a dragon, one that is not his own. We really don't know the intention of Daemon's behavior in this scene just yet. Is the song he is singing capable of calming or attracting a dragon? Is Daemon trying to tame and bond a second dragon for himself? Or is he just confirming its location for another potential rider? I guess we'll have to wait until season 2 to get answers to these questions though. Now that brings us to the climax of the episode, Lucerys' visit to Storm's End. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe this is the first exterior look we get of Storm's End in either Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. As one of the last great ancient castles we have not yet seen on screen, it was so exciting to get a visual glimpse of, and it looked absolutely incredible. Lucerys arrives at Storm's End to find Aemond and his massive dragon have already beat him there. We soon find out that Borros Baratheon seeing Lucerys in the first place was simply a formality. The Green faction has already secured the support of Storm's End via a marriage pact between Aemond and one of Borros' daughters. Lucerys, having already been proposed to one of Daemon's daughters, is unable to offer any sort of counter-offer and is forced to flee, having embarrassingly failed on his mission. I want to quickly focus on the delivery of Rhaenyra's message to Borros. While Borros takes the scroll, he has to summon a maester in order to have it read to him. I believe this subtly implies that Borros is unable to read himself. Since the maester whispered the message into Borros' ear rather than read it aloud for the hall to hear, we really have no way of knowing if the maester shared the true contents of the letter or not. I really wonder if the maester was already biased toward the Green faction and told some sort of lie to Borros to ensure his fury toward the Black faction. What I'm alluding to here is a popular theory that the Order of the Maesters is secretly conspiring in support of the Green faction. After all, the Citadel, the place where all maesters are trained, is based in Old Town, where House Hightower is also based, and is most heavily bankrolled by House House Hightower. However, before Lucerys can flee, he is confronted by Aemond, who demands to take one of his eyes in exchange for the eye he took from him in their childhood brawl all those years ago. We see that Aemond has replaced his destroyed eye with a sapphire, heavily invoking White Walker and Night King imagery. Boros, refusing to allow bloodshed in his castle, demands they both depart. Rather than let Lucerys escape, Aemond pursues him on Dragonback, and despite the sheer size difference of the two dragons, our first dragon duel of the series begins. Despite the wishes of Aemond, his dragon seems to have a strong will of its own, and slays both Lucerys and his dragon, sending their remains plummeting down to the sea. This is a starkly fascinating scene. In the book, we are told that Aemond intended to murder Lucerys, but obviously no one was in the sky with them to see the truth of the matter. I'm incredibly supportive of this narrative change, as it opens the door for future dragon-based events to be misinterpreted, and true history to be revealed as the series progresses. The episode, and thus the season, ends with Daemon relaying the news of her son's death to Rhaenyra. The final shot we get is one showcasing Rhaenyra's pure, unfiltered rage. We can infer from her expression that any semblance of caution toward violent war has shattered. This was just the instigation from the Green faction that she needed. The Dance of the Dragons has begun. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content of this nature, be sure to hit that subscribe button. You can also ring that notification bell to be updated whenever I upload a new video. If you'd like to check out my fiction writing as well as my vlog channel and social media profiles, visit my website with koji.com/@GurnHime. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next week for a video breaking down my overall thoughts on the season.